Welcome to the first episode of the Nathan Jun Show. I'm going to be completely transparent with you. It is Sunday, November 23rd, and I apologize in advance for this episode because, frankly, I have no clue what I am doing. I bought all the equipment, I have been watching YouTube videos nonstop. I wanted to launch a podcast because I'm actually going to be a guest on one of the most popular podcasts in a few days, and I needed to rush this. But I also just needed to light a fire under my ass and get this done. It is called The Nathan Jun Show. I had a few other ideas for a podcast name. One of them was going to be Factual Opinions. Another idea was Did You Read It? Because a lot of my content is based off of this fundamental belief that Americans on both sides of the political spectrum only read headlines right now. And they would rather just get their emotional reaction from that rather than actually reading the articles. I actually read the articles and the data. And then the other one was going to be called Stupid Immigrant, which my management was kind of not keen on me naming it something other than my name. You know, I think that I guess I have built some sort of equity with my name. So we are just going with the Nathan Jun Show, even though I think Stupid Immigrant is a really great name for a book. So if I ever get big enough to actually write a book, I might do that. Now, I have had a lot of opportunities in the past year. I have been talking about doing a podcast since March even. And that was when I was blowing up just basically only on TikTok. Because if you're seeing this or if you're listening to this, chances are that you might have seen me on TikTok or on Instagram. I think I have almost 850,000 followers across both platforms, which is weird, to be completely honest with you. I try not to think about it just because every time I do, I start to get like armpit sweat just because it's very overwhelming. But I've had opportunities where people have come to me and they've been like, I'll produce your podcast for you. All you have to do is show up and hit record and bring your guests, and that's it. The problem is that most of these podcast offers, they want to take anywhere between 40 to 50% of any possible revenue I would get from this. And I get it because, again, I have been struggle central trying to figure out how to actually do this. But I am hopeful that I can do this on my own. I'm hopeful that I can keep your attention. And, you know, I have just embraced that everybody's first podcast or everybody's first like YouTube video just sucks. So we're going to go with it. And eventually I'll get good at this. I was able to figure it out on other social media platforms. So this will hopefully just be the natural progression. Okay. So usually in a first episode, you will do things like, you know, introduce who you are, introduce what your podcast will be about, what users, not users, but what listeners are actually going to get out of it. Before I do that, I actually thought I could have a theme for this first episode. And the first theme is something that I worry about as a content creator in the political and advocacy space, who is growing very, very fast. I've literally added 100,000 followers on Instagram just in the past 3 weeks. Again, very overwhelming. But I thought I would start this first episode with all of the reasons why I am probably going to get canceled. Yes, because I constantly fear being canceled. I will tell you that my love language, the 5 love languages are physical touch, acts of service, quality time, gifts, and words of affirmation. My love language is words of affirmation. It is my give and it is my receive. So when I get canceled, it really emotionally impacts me and I stress out and I stay up until 4 a.m. like worried about it. I don't know why. I'm starting to get better as I've gotten bigger just because people just scream at me every day. But I still do fear getting canceled. So what are the reasons why I believe that it is quite possible that I will get canceled? Number one, I am a pragmatist who believes in some aspects of leftist ideology. Now, what's interesting about my past incidents being canceled is that I have never been canceled by MAGA. I have yet to be canceled by the right. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I always cite my sources. I use factual data. That data does sometimes come from news articles, but more often than not, I will literally just go to the government entity and to their website and I will read through it just so that I can be very, very sure. I love using census data. I love using exit polling data. I cite most of my sources, so it is really, really hard to challenge me when everything that I put out into the universe is typically backed by some sort of evidentiary support that is substantiated through data and facts. It is really hard to argue with math. It probably helps that an Asian person is giving math to the audience, so they probably trust me at a higher level. I'm not going to get into the bias that comes with being Asian because I've dealt with both the bias as well as with the racism. I digress. But what ends up happening is that because I am somebody who actively supported Zoran Mamdani in the most recent New York City mayor campaign, I am somebody who believes aggressively that wealth inequality and corporate greed and billionaire CEOs or millionaire CEOs who are basically making decisions strictly based off of their ability to purchase another yacht. I believe that you can almost point towards every single economic problem in this country, and it usually comes down to how extreme our wealth inequality is and how hard it is for us to raise our progressive tax rates, to raise our corporate tax rates, and to basically try and rein in and control tax evasion and tax loopholes. When you present this into the universe and you say things like wealth inequality is so awful, like free childcare, like universal health care, when you even call out the fact that certain things like APAC funding is manipulating a congressman, congresswoman, senator's ability to make sound decisions, when you call out the fact that you believe that Benjamin Netanyahu was knowingly committing a genocide in Israel, like when you say things like this, people will typically look at you and say, "Oh, you're a leftist." The problem is that I'm not. And that is really just because, not because I don't believe ideologically in what a lot of leftists actually stand for. It's because their means of communication and their means of how they actually want to, I would say, assimilate other people into leftism is so against reality and it's so against what I believe. What I believe is in pragmatism. I am a double Virgo. I am a 8 in numerology, and all of that basically says I can look at the landscape of how things are, and my kind of POV is we have to work towards it. But if we just jump from step 1 to step 10, and then we scream at people who believe that we just need to start at step 10, I tend to get in a lot of disagreements with people. So I generally have only been canceled by leftists in general. And it's really sad for me just because I will sit on my platforms and I will say things like, no, I agree with you. I actually align with a lot of the things that you want. You just want to destroy everything about how our electoral process is, about candidates, about like anything. And I think like a couple days ago, I was in this fight with a leftist on Threads because they were basically telling me like, look at like, Zoran Mamdani in New York City. Look at the Seattle mayor election. Like, look what happens when you push forward leftist candidates. I don't see why that wouldn't work in other areas. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, you live in Los Angeles. Like, yes, I live in New York City, but I grew up in a small Greek town in Florida called Tarpon Springs, Florida. I have MAGA family members. My dad has been a Republican all of his life. My mom, until she passed a few years ago, was a Republican for her entire life. I was basically indoctrinated into conservative Christian MAGA household, okay? If you don't understand that putting forward a candidate like Zoran Mamdani in front of people who are in not even rural towns, but even in areas that are just outside of Tampa, Florida, which used to be purple, but is now pushing more towards red, like it is never going to work. And I had kind of challenged them and said, well, look at Mikey Sherrill, and look at Abigail Spanberger. Oh my God, I can't talk. This is so hard to talk actually like this long. Look at these candidates who are centrists, moderates, and look how much they spanked the ass of the MAGA candidates that were in front of them. Look at the exit polling data. Look at the district by district maps and see how quickly it swung, okay, from people who were voting for Trump in the 2024 election, and you got like 8, 10, 12, 14 point swings in the other direction in these areas that are aggressively Republican areas. And a leftist might say, well, you'll never know because they don't put forward a leftist candidate. And I will say to that, like, you cannot win in these areas if it just sniffs of socialism. Okay. New York City was able to put forward this candidate because he was able to communicate easy to understand things like cost of living, rent control, childcare, free buses, accessibility to groceries, okay? But he was able to do that in spite of being a democratic socialist. I think a lot of people think that democratic socialism is what won. What actually won was a very, very clear communication strategy on how to actually tap into people who simply are finding the affordability crisis to be more than they can stand. And I believe that that worked in New York City. In areas like Virginia and New Jersey, I genuinely believe that the swing from specifically the Hispanic Latino community also drastically helped, Cheryl and Spanberger in that process. And because I think a lot of Latino and Hispanic Americans are looking at what's happening with ICE and looking at what's happening with all these raids and seeing their fellow people getting dragged out of cars, families getting separated at courthouses. And I think they're basically saying, yeah, like I might have voted for the people who I assumed were going to be the illegal aliens or the people that are ruining it for the rest of us, because I know for a fact that a lot of the Latino and Hispanic community who voted for Trump are saying to themselves, well, I did it legally and they're ruining this experience in America for me. And so I am voting for them to be exited out of this country. I don't think they realized that it was going to happen to like families and people who are just here to work jobs and people who have the same exact dream that they had in coming to America. They just went through it in a different means. So yes, I will eventually believe that I could possibly get canceled by leftists just because it happens right now. But again, I am for leftist ideologies, like some of them. Like I would never support socialism fully in this country. I hope anybody who is MAGA or specifically my family hears that, just because I understand like what that would actually do to our country in terms of like we would literally go into a depression and it would be like a purposefully induced famine in this country. But I do believe in certain aspects of democratic socialism, just because at its core, you are trying to give power back to the people. You're trying to just give like basic human rights, and you are trying to distribute wealth in a way that allows people to not struggle. So yeah, I am for a lot of those things. I just happen to not be for the pathway and for the means to get there. Okay, number 2, my legal name is actually Nathan Pokert. Yes, you might be surprised to hear this. I was adopted, as I said before, into a white evangelical Southern family when I was 3 months old, and Pokert is my family name. My actual birth name when I was born in Seoul, Korea in 1983 was Jun Kyung-il. Jun Kyung-il, which is Jun is my family name. It's spelled Jun. And so that was my birth name. As an adult, I started to evolve a deeper love for my Asian heritage. And that really came from just a lot of things. For a long time, I think if you are adopted, specifically if you are a person of color and you're adopted into a white family, you really do assimilate into white culture and you don't really know any better. I think as an adult and as I got older, I really, really much more closely aligned and showed a lot of pride in my Korean heritage. I love Korean culture, love K-pop music. I could do an entire second podcast or second web series just about my love of K-pop. I actually do have a TikTok account, which is not Nathan Jun, where I do talk about K-pop. But I have, recently been more proud of my Korean heritage than anything else and my identity as a Korean American and as a Korean immigrant. So I made a conscious decision professionally, even before I started becoming a content creator, to go back to my birth name, which is Nathan Jun. But why would I get canceled for that? Well, it's because if somebody were to like research me and they'll be like, wait, this guy's name is Nathan Pokart. He's not even Korean. I can be like, no, I am. I was just adopted, but you're not allowed to take away the fact that I still was born in Seoul. So if you are a second generation Korean American and your parents are fully Korean, like there's a lot of, I guess, tension in that you might say like you are way more Korean than I am simply because you have a lived experience growing up with Korean parents. That's fine. I would just say it is just a different experience. But, it's funny because I'm married to a Taiwanese man. I'm learning Mandarin right now because his parents, they speak a little bit of English, but not a lot. But his extended family barely speaks any English. So as I have become more a part of this family, I love them so much. It really did fulfill a place that I didn't even know was missing in my life, which was having an Asian family. I've started learning Mandarin. Also, my husband and I are having kids, and I believe he intends to speak to our children primarily in Mandarin, and I don't want them to have conversations about me unless I know. So I now at least know things like de la gong, or it's like, or ni de baba, which is like your father, your dad. So if I ever hear my husband say ni de baba, like to our children, I know he is talking about me. I might not know the full context of it, but I know he's talking about me. Number 3 reason I might get canceled is because, well, my husband and I, we do very well for ourselves professionally. I think that there is this kind of expectation that people who are for progressive politics might atypically be middle class or even be somebody who is struggling. And I'm not bragging about it. I am just saying that, I've said this in the past before, but, my husband and we are barely, but we are, as a household, in the top progressive tax bracket in this country. A lot of that comes from us both working in New York City in very senior level positions. I have worked hard all my life. I've had a job since I was 13 years old. I had 3 part-time jobs in college. I graduated with student debt. All of those things. I did not grow up in a rich family, okay? But I have worked my ass off. I was able to pay off my loans. I've been a good little saver. A lot of that has to do with the fact that my dad worked for the IRS, and he opened my first checking account after I got my first part-time job when I turned 13. So I have had really strong financial literacy since a young age, and I think a lot of that is what has contributed to me being able to be successful and to be financially stable right now. Now, that does not mean that I don't actively say things like, yes, I even think that even though my husband and I are barely in the top progressive tax bracket, that does not mean that we should not be taxed more. I am for the millionaire tax that Mamdani proposed in New York City, even though we don't qualify for it. If we did one day, I would be for it. And, I just am one of those people where I think that what is missing a little bit in politics is people who are successful, people who do very well for themselves, but people who will vocally stand up for people who aren't. And before you try and cancel me for it, like, I make a lot of donations. I volunteer. I do all the things that people will scream at me for, but I just happen to be successful in my career, and both my husband and I are very successful in our individual careers. Last thing that I could be canceled for is I am not an economist. I have never actually projected that I am an economist. I have never projected that I am a political expert. If you notice in all of my social bios, I do not have the word expert in any of them because I am not an expert in this area. What's ironic is my husband actually has a master's degree in international economics from Johns Hopkins University. He actually could be a self-professed economic expert. All of his friends, some of them actually work for this administration. I'm not going to get into that. But all of his friends work in finance and economics. And I think that aspect sometimes is something that comes up because every so often somebody will go in my comment section and be like, I just looked you up and you have a degree in marketing and a secondary degree in data and analytics. And I'm like, yeah, it's and yes. And it's so by profession, I am a marketer, but I specialize in data analytics and consumer insights. So my job is to actually analyze data and consumer behaviors. And then I work with brands to develop communication and marketing strategies, which is why I believe that I am an effective communicator and an effective communication strategist, because I study consumer behavior specifically in media platforms like TikTok and social media. And I generally understand how people need to and like to be speaked to. And so if you were to ask me, like, why do you think that your platform has grown so fast just in the past year? Because I've literally only been doing this for a little bit more than a year. It's really because, one, I'm a data analyst and I research consumer insights. Because I'm a data analyst, I have to analyze basically the numbers, and then I have to come to conclusions about what they mean. And I have to usually give a strategy based off of that. But I also am a communicator. What's interesting is that prior to my previous role, I was the global communications director at BMW Group. I was an actual spokesperson for them. I used to go on like Cheddar. I used to go on like Business Insider, and I did all these web videos where I talked about like specific industries and things related to the car industry and to innovation specifically. So I have media training, which means that I was instructed and taught on how to speak. And I was instructed and taught on how to handle media questions and how to actually formulate sentences that will resonate with an audience. So what's funny is that I actually lost my job at BMW Group because of COVID, which makes sense because people stopped buying automobiles right around COVID hit. And then I didn't work for about 9 months. And then I got a job at a teen brand, a teen retail brand that was targeting Gen Z. What's hilarious is I got that job because of a referral, because a coworker that I used to work with hired me. And I had never downloaded TikTok before that job. I literally didn't have TikTok on my phone when I started that job. And I had to learn TikTok very, very quickly. And I did learn TikTok, and I managed a large team that built a massive TikTok audience for this brand. And so when you look at the summation of all of my background, and when you look at the summation of even that experience running TikTok for a multi-billion-dollar retail brand, all of those things kind of sum up and result in why I believe that I have been able to build a platform. But I could easily get canceled because I'm not an economist. I'm somebody who actually just loves reading and studying stuff. And then I just happen to be somebody who's very, very good at communicating things. Most of the comments that I get from my audience are people who just appreciate my ability to break things down in simple to understand terms. If you know anything about marketing and about management consulting, because that's pretty much what I do as a management consultant, my job is to take insanely complex things, analyze them, study them, research them, come to hypothetical conclusions, and then build a 3-page deck for the CEO that they can easily understand. That is why it is a very, very easily transferable skill. Okay, that was a lot longer than I thought that was. Holy crap. But I'm going to get into the questions about my show. So why am I starting this show? I don't know. I truly do not know why I'm actually starting this podcast. It just felt like the natural progression to do, and it seems like that's how everybody is getting rich. You know, like the second question is, what are you going to get out of this? Like, it's like, what are you, the audience? But what am I getting out of this? I'm still working. Like, I still work with clients. I'm one of the few people in this space who has an audience of my size who is still choosing to work. And that is just because, again, my husband and I have a life that we like. We are having children soon. We need to be able to support them and, you know, be able to pay for them because surrogacy is expensive as fuck. Okay, so we have to afford all those things. So I can't quit yet because I don't make enough money from just doing social media. So part of me launching this podcast is, transparently speaking and just being fully honest, if it can blow up and I can become the Asian Joe Rogan for progressives, I'm not going to complain about it. So yeah, we love transparency, right? People have to love that. What are you, the listener, going to get out of it? So if you follow me on TikTok and Instagram, all of my videos are anywhere between 2 to 3 minutes, and they have a very, very clear and specific point. Hopefully, if you are still listening to my podcast at this point, which means you are not bored 25 minutes in, you've enjoyed it, and you've enjoyed my commentary, and you've enjoyed the fact that it's like, wow, okay, great. I like him in 3-minute increments, and then I also like listening to him in 25. Or you could say, wow, this guy is insufferable. and I might lose you off the get-go. That's okay. You know, I'm still going to make the videos on TikTok and Instagram, so you can just keep following me there. But I like the idea of long form just because, you know, it's an opportunity for me to be a little bit more candid, a little bit more off the cuff, to make mistakes, to probably curse a lot more, and to be a little bit more relatable. I think that if you've been listening this long into it, I'm more appreciative because a lot of people accuse me of reading from scripts when I do my videos. Clearly, I do not have a 26-minute script in my hand. I'm holding my hands up if you're listening to this on podcasts for the YouTube show, just so people know, like, I'm not reading from a script. I just have media training and I have the ability to form coherent sentences. Shocker. So yeah, I don't know what I'm going to get out of this except for maybe having this eventually be my full-time career. I hope that what you get out of this is the same stuff you love from my TikTok or my Instagram, just in longer form with a little bit more hilarious commentary. I'm probably going to talk about culture. I would love to talk about gay issues. Being a gay man who has lived in New York City for 18 years now, the gay communities in New York City, LA, San Francisco, DC, Atlanta, Chicago, like, I have a lot of thoughts about that. Not for this episode, but maybe eventually. And I'm going to have guests on who are going to talk about these sort of things too. How often will episodes go out? I don't know, because I'm launching this probably at the worst possible time, which is right around the holidays. And I do have to go to Tampa next week to spend a Thanksgiving with my family. Actually, this week, technically, because it is Sunday. So I'm going to try to put them out once a week. 30 minutes. We're almost at 30 minutes now, so that could be great. But they might come sporadically. I don't necessarily want to do a like every Monday at 10 a.m. I just need to put them out when I have time to record it, just because, again, I have a full-time career. Why did you start talking about politics? Really good question. So I used to not talk about politics. I probably had a very generic gay man living in New York City social media profile as of last July. Around July, when Kamala Harris dropped out, I saw this thing happening on TikTok, which was starting to just infuriate me, which was a group of people who were basically saying that they were going to withhold their support of Kamala Harris because of what they believe to be her direct involvement in the genocide happening in the Gaza Strip. And I also just saw a lot of people who were being kind of racist, even on the progressive side of politics, and saying that, you know, we need to have a real convention. She's a DEI hire. It was making me lose my mind. On top of that, or I should say, as a result of that, I started getting more trapped in political TikTok. And then I started getting the MAGA side of TikTok. And I just could not believe what I was seeing and hearing. It was fascinating. And I have MAGA in my family, but like the MAGA in my family are actually like way more advanced in terms of their ability to understand what is actually happening in this country. I'm not going to get into my MAGA family that often because I actually do love them and I actually do care about them. I understand that that might be upsetting to some people and the fact that I haven't cut them out of my life, but that's my choice. They are my family. You don't get to pick your family. And so, yeah, I just saw the most batshit crazy wild things coming from the MAGA side of politics, and I was just fascinated by it. So I started making response and reply and stitch videos from it. Those were just doing okay. It really wasn't until after the election when I just saw the general response from MAGA about it. I just lost my mind. I went for a mental health walk in Prospect Park immediately after the election on November 6th in 2024. And I was looking at some videos, and I did it for my mental health, but it actually made my mental health worse. And I opened up my phone and I went off. And that video got like 3.4 million views. And I just kept going. And what I realized was that not just MAGA, but I think Americans in general crave explanations on complex things. It's not the responsibility of every American to be rooted in knowledge about trade policies between Brazil and Europe and how that impacts the United States. That would be asking a lot in our already hectic, stressful lives where a lot of us are just trying to survive and get through the day without opening up the bottle of tequila. So I realize that there is an opportunity and a hole to fill in the space where a lot of people on the progressive side tend to just scream and shout and to just they want to elicit rage. They want to kind of get you angry and upset with this is not normal. Then you have kind of what I call the informative accounts. Those are your breaking news accounts. Those are great. Those are very useful. I learn a lot from them and I get a lot of my news from those as well. So I'm not dissing those. But they don't really go that far into explanations. They don't explain what does it mean? Well, what does this mean? And so what I realize is there's a really good opportunity to educate, inform, and try and add in a little bit of personality and flavor into it. So that's really what kind of kicked off my entry into politics. Does your husband support you? Yes, he does. But I will say this, it is taking a little bit of a toll on us just because when you become an influencer, it really does consume your life in not healthy ways. I would not advise anybody to go down this path unless you feel insanely secure in your relationships with your partner and with your friends. And if you can actually take the heat and if you can mindfully be able to separate yourself from the idea of growth. I actually stopped caring about growth in terms of like hustling to try and get followers and hustling to like just keep growing and growing and growing. Like I love hitting certain milestones, like, and I will celebrate them just because again, I'm fascinated by the fact that this has happened to me, but I don't obsess over trying to just become popular. What I've realized is focusing primarily on educating and informing my audience and being able to bring them with me on my own journey of evaluating what a lot of these things mean in politics actually just leads to growth. It reminds me of that movie, The Post, with Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks when they're about to IPO and Meryl Streep is trying to explain to the board why they need to go public. And that is because they want to invest in more reporters. And there's a great line in there, which I might be misquoting, but she says something along the lines of great quality will lead to more readers. Because a lot of investors, when they invest in companies, will ask the company to, do layoffs or to create more efficiency. But what they were doing was they were trying to land an initial public offering to be able to hire more reporters. So I think a lot of my channel kind of responds to that. I'm not saying I am the Washington Post. Do not cancel me. Do not stitch me and say that. Last question. How are you juggling working and doing this? Horribly juggling it. It is so hard to be cognitively aware of all of the awful things happening in this country and try and look at numbers in a spreadsheet and make decks. Do you know how hard it is to be so aware of every horrible news story and every horrible thing that this administration does and try and actually turn around and be like, oh, well, I guess I need to kind of look at P&L and look at cost efficiencies and, see if ROI projections are actually on track. So if you are somebody who basically wakes up every day and it's like, I can't fucking believe that my boss or my company expects me to like input numbers and sit in meetings that are about future meetings, all while my CEO like lives on a yacht and, pays themselves, 400% bonuses while I am just trying to just reach like 40% at most. You're not alone. It is not lost on me the fact that a lot of political creators who still work, or just people in general who still work, but who are highly attuned with politics, have to wake up every day and basically make their bosses and make their CEOs more rich. It is the most sick and twisted part of being in this space for me specifically. So to answer the question, how are you juggling it? Not well. And I guess that answers the other question that's not on my list of how is your mental health? It's better right now. I think that it's because I think for the past few months, there was the mayor election where we were just trying to prevent a sexual predator becoming our mayor. And then we had the loss of the healthcare fight. And that was, consuming a lot of my mind, and we lost, and now we have to deal with it, and things are going to get worse, and that weighs on me. But, there isn't really anything that is crazy grabbing attention this week that could literally change in 3 days. I'm still bracing for Mamdani to get basically to start his term in early January. And then like 3 days later, Trump basically says, oh yeah, I'm going to send the National Guard to New York. It could happen. But right now my mental health is okay, but it fluctuates. So that is everything. I literally thought this was going to be like 15 minutes at most, and I made an entire 36-minute podcast episode. So if you listen to the entire thing, I appreciate you. I'm appreciative of this in general. I really am. Every time somebody walks up to me on the street and says that they really appreciate my content, every time somebody next to me on a plane ride, which happened on a flight to Atlanta recently, tells me how much they value what I put out there, it really does mean a lot. And especially because, again, like I don't make a lot of money from this, which is why I'm launching a podcast. So I don't have outro music yet. I don't have intro music. But again, I do appreciate you sitting through this entire thing or watching this on YouTube or playing it in the background while you're working or driving or whatever. But yeah, I appreciate, just this journey for myself. And I really, truly hope that I don't disappoint you in the process. So thank you, and try and get through Fall Brawl over the course of the next few days.